Thank you for watching this Last Mile Profits video.
One of our viewers, Jack, from the US, had a request for a video that he'd like to see. Keep on watching to find out more.
Last Mile Profits is brought to you by Parcel Pending by Quadient. Gregor, I think that we have something unusual. The second unusual thing, other than the fact that Gary's not here with me today for this second recording, but we've actually had a viewer question.
Yes, we had a question from Jack, who wrote to us directly via LinkedIn. And he wants to know about the out-of-home trend in Europe. He's noticed that we are very much locker friendly in the Europe, especially compared to the States, where things are moving, but it's not necessarily quite as established as things here. And he wants to know how this multi-year trend, as he described it, has been transversing in Europe. And looking at that question, Marek, I think it would be interesting just to look at the parties that were, or the companies that were quick to the party and getting their out-of-home networks up to speed nice and early, and those that are a little bit late to the party, so to speak. Now, what's interesting is when I looked at this question, DHL sprung to my mind, obviously inventors of the parcel locker, strong position in Germany. I thought they'll be prime candidate. But from talking to you off air, it seems it's not quite the case. So why is that?
Absolutely. Well, we've talked about this, I think, in the past, but for those who haven't watched and are not aware, Deutsche Post in many ways is the father, or if they prefer, the mother of the locker, because they were the guys who worked very hard, I believe, with Käbe in Austria to create the concept. They had 101, in inverted commas, patents for that technology. But what was interesting is they didn't grow as fast as they could have done. So although it's a big network, I think probably now around about the low teens of thousands of machines, for a country the size of Germany, which is almost 3 times Poland, to have probably about 40% of the network size that InPost, the Polish leading player, has, well, that seems a bit disappointing. So I think, yes, it is surprising that the father, if we call it that, of lockers was relatively slow, not compared to others, but compared to the opportunity. When I say others, other posts, compared to the opportunity and compared to somebody like InPost, or for that matter, Nova Post, which is a big carrier in Ukraine, who has a similar number of lockers to InPost. So I think it's interesting that the reason, by the way, I think, is that it was a question of over-engineering. At the beginning, you had to actually go and register, I believe, at a post office to have the right to use a locker. And there were various other complications which made it difficult. And I think InPost went completely the other way and said, let's do everything we can to make it as easy as possible to use a machine. But something I noticed, Gregor, in Jack's question that was also quite interesting, because he specifically talked about returns and exchanges. And I think that for some players, lockers are a must. So Vinted, why were they so active in the locker space? Why did they partner up with Blockit to create a machine and to set up their own network? Because for re-commerce or sale of used, very low value items, the only way to make it financially feasible is to have out-of-home delivery. And the most efficient of the out-of-home delivery models when used at scale is, of course, lockers. So I think for exchanges, as Jack mentioned, which is this sort of thing, it's unbeatable. But the other thing that's interesting, some new markets, and I've seen this not just in Europe, I've seen it in Latin America, that when they kick off, they actually start off with returns, or what I call the first mile. So small e-commerce players who are not financially able to support getting a courier to come and pick up an item, but they can very easily drop off something at a PUDO point or a locker close by. So I think what I have experienced is that the model is changing a bit. You're getting markets, and I know in the UK, first mile is very important. You're getting markets where you have new, should we say, starting points. So yes, in answer to Jack's question, I think players are adapting. Some players have been historically more successful. Some players have been partially successful. I think InPost is a great example. They've been extremely successful in Poland. Historically, they weren't so successful in the UK. They then flipped the model a bit. They've started focusing on the topics we mentioned, sort of to be a first mile player, to support exchanges as well. And my understanding is actually at the moment their machines are pretty much chock a block with parcels, which is great. So I would say that the thing about lockers and out of home in general, and actually the last mile in general, is it's all about adapting. It's about seeing what the consignee needs, what the shipper needs, and finding the right solution. So, Gregor, I don't know if you think I've answered the question, but I feel that yes, a lot has happened. There've been winners and losers, but there's also a propensity, which is good, to adapt the models.
Mhm. Well, the journalist in me will ensure that you do answer the question. Because if you recall, yes, we talked about how companies are embracing this change and the situation with DHL and where they've done well and where they were maybe slower to pick up on out of home than they could have been, given that they invented the locker. But one of the other things that we wanted to look at was maybe some of the players that have been a little bit late to the party. They now want to be part of the party. They want to lead the party, but they're playing catch up a little bit. So, who do you think is maybe been a little bit late and is now making concerted efforts to catch up?
For me, actually, the biggest players in Europe, most of them have been quite late, actually. So InPost is growing very fast, but it's not one of the top two or three networks in Europe yet. DPD is the obvious one. I think DPD has an incredible to-door service, but they haven't really got their act together on out of home. It's different depending upon market, and something we all know about DPD. It's very market specific, but nevertheless, I think they could be a lot stronger than they are. I know it's a priority within the group to do something, but let's see where it takes them. GLS was fairly late to the party. Again, I know it's a priority for them to do something, and we can actually see a lot happening in that space. But again, compared to their size, I'm not sure they're there. The players that, other than the ones I mentioned, that have actually really done something, interestingly, are not always the biggest posts. Not saying they're not big per se, but vis-a-vis something like La Poste DPD or Deutsche Post DHL, are the Nordic posts. All of them have been pretty strong. Whether it's Post Nord, which is the biggest player there, a lot of experience with parcel lockers. They have primarily Switbox machines. You have Posti, Norway Post, sorry, beg your pardon, Finnish Post. The guys at Posti will kill me for that. Finnish Post, who are also very strong, and they're one of the first players to embrace that technology, and they've been pretty successful. And then you've got Posten, Norway Post, I'll get it right this time. And again, they've done a lot in this space. And the final one, which is, Baltic Rim, even though it's not Nordics, but they're very close to the Nordics in mentality, is Estonia, where Omniva have been really, really strong. So I think there have been posts that have embraced it, but it's usually the ones that have either geographic issues or issues related to ecological topics and so on, I think, which have made them want and need to go in that direction. But yes, they've been pretty successful, more successful than some of the really big players. Oh, the last one from the sort of the big players, it's linked to GLS in a way, is Royal Mail, who historically also haven't done much in the parcel locker space. Although, if Daniel Kretinsky's promise to have 20,000 lockers up and running within a couple of years materializes, that will change fast. So I think, Gregor, that gives a reasonable picture. Generally speaking, Nordic posts have been pretty strong in this space. The non-postal operators InPost and Nova Post have been incredibly strong. The posts from the southern part of Europe, I think they've got a way to go.
And I suppose Jack here is from the States. He has a little bit of a personal connection to the sector given his business. But we can see that things aren't quite as developed in America as here in Europe. Yourself and Gary have talked about it. So I suppose there is possibility there for someone to get in there, do a lot of business early doors, establish themselves, and become a dominant player. But they're going to have to do it in the right way. So if somebody does want to do that, what is going to be key for making those first steps?
But I think above all, learn the lessons that Europe learned. Don't reinvent the wheel. See what worked and why, what didn't work and why. Follow somebody like InPost or Novopost more than perhaps some of the other players. Probably the other thing is to get out of the not invented here syndrome. Forget what they were used to do and say, okay, how can we make it work? Because I've often heard, Gregor, people say to me, oh, well, the US lockers will never work because people get in their cars and they don't want to have things that they have to drop off and pick up. And I think if somebody can develop a slipper distance, super convenient model, and slipper distance in the US may actually mean slippers in my car, but it's on the way. I think that's going to be important. And above all, the US carriers, I call them legacy carriers, have not been super quick at adapting to new market trends. If there were to be a US player, I'd say is worth observing. You won't be surprised to hear it's Amazon. So I'd say, look at what's happening in Europe, look at what Amazon is doing, take the best from that, and give customer-centric, convenient models. And then I think people will be surprised just how big the uptake is in the US.